Hey, it's James here from GoodGuitarist.com, and today I want to show you everything that you need to know about palm muting on guitar. Now, the term muting is used pretty broadly on guitar. The other common technique that we often call muting revolves around muting the strings with your chord hand and getting a percussive strum. And I cover that in a different lesson since it's an entirely different thing. There's a link in the corner and the description if that's what you were looking to learn. Otherwise, we're gonna begin with our palm muting lesson. I'm gonna start with a chord shape here. I'm just gonna play the E chord because it's the easiest to get the right kind of palm muting sound. But you can apply this, as you'll see later in this lesson, not only to this chord shape, but in some other ways as well. Real quick before we dive in and learn the technique, if you need help with any of the basics, for instance, making smooth chord transitions, learning all the basic chords like E and so on, I have a free ebook. It's completely free for all my subscribers. I'll put a link down below for that so you can grab your copy. Otherwise, when it comes to the technique itself, instead of strumming our open E chord, we can lightly touch our palm to the strings just beside the bridge. So I'm putting this part of my hand here, I'm gonna touch it to the bridge, and then I'm gonna start to overlap the strings. So our palm is touching the thicker strings, but overlapping just like a centimeter of it. And you can test this by giving it a little strum. If you do it too much, it completely kills the string, and too little, and you're not doing anything, right? So you just get just the right amount to your own taste. And that is the most basic way to mute. That's all there is to it. Downstrokes only. And once you're good with that, we can take it a step further. You know, you're not limited to just the thicker strings. We can keep holding the same E chord, and instead of doing the thicker strings, we can shift our entire hand up a little bit and get maybe the middle strings or the thinner strings. Now, something to look out for here is the angle of your palm. For me, the most comfortable is something like this. And you'll notice that's not a straight line, right? We're overlapping a different amount of each string. And if we were to angle our hand so that it gets each string perfectly, it's kind of awkward. And on top of that, being able to get the pick to go through each of the strings without shifting your hand, it just doesn't work out, right? So what you got to get used to doing is moving up and down depending on which group of strings you want to mute. You know, it's something that you would just experiment with. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Well, there is a wrong way, which is to like try to line it up perfectly and then, you know, kill your wrist and injure yourself. But, you know, otherwise, you just want to get used to picking the thicker strings, the thinner strings, and paying attention to how it all feels and how much of each string you're overlapping as you go up and down. You know, you might not want to overlap the top strings as much because they're so thin that if you do like a centimeter, it totally kills it, right? You know, you just do a very tiny amount for those ones. Now, to take this technique a step further, we can add upstrokes. But if we do it the same way, just leaving our palm down and playing upstrokes, it doesn't really give us anything more on top of downstrokes only, aside from being a little more difficult, you know? I find that the most useful way to apply this whole concept is that kind of like surfy tunes like Jason Mraz, Jack Johnson. That's a good way to get into it, and you'll end up finding lots of places where you can use it. But basically, you end up lifting your hand off the guitar as you do this. And you end up with this combination of very muted downstrokes with slightly open upstrokes, and it creates this really cool vibe. Let's just take a look at the technique itself. As I come down with my strum, my palm goes to the palm muting spot first, and then my pick goes through the strings. You know, you'll slow it first, and you get the right sound slow. Make sure your strings aren't just completely killed, which is a cool technique on its own, but here we want to get something out of them, some notes. And then when we come up, we are lifting up. And your pick doesn't go first. Your hand lifts first, kind of at the same time. And then when you come down for a palm mute again, it's going to stop the strings. And when you do it quicker, the duration of the strings ringing out is going to change, and it's going to sound more like the technique. And I know there's like a pretty big divide between like when I showed you it slowly and that, but trust me, it's the exact same motions, just gone through it enough times, slowly speeding it up until eventually you get the final result. Now, before we go, I'd like to cover a couple more use cases for palm muting. We've already covered like the chords and strumming thing in the pure downstroke style, and then downstrokes and upstrokes. But another place where you're going to see palm muting all the time is when you're playing power chords, you know, like rocking out. And that's a really great way to do it. Just, you know, moving this one shape around the guitar. I have another lesson on power chords if you're interested. If you play electric guitar, it's a must know. And, you know, this was actually my first exposure to the palm muting technique, was trying to learn Barracuda, which starts off with an E power chord, which is an E chord, but you're only hitting the thicker strings. And there's nothing new in terms of the technique. The strumming thing is a bit of a thing, you know, doing that gallop. We're not going to get into that. But basically, I'm just playing a power chord and I'm just going down and up really gently. It's all about keeping like a small motion. You don't have to put so much into it, especially on electric guitar, because you can just turn up your guitar volume to get louder. You don't want to be strumming it super hard. And finally, people use palm muting all the time when they're playing riffs and melodies. You know, it's probably one of the easiest ways to do it. A good way to practice it is with your minor pentatonic scale. And, you know, you could go up and down the whole thing. That's a great exercise. A great way to practice moving your palm muting hand up and down so that you're muting each string the perfect amount. But you can also just focus on a couple notes and then like lifting it off for some of them, right? You know, palm, mute, palm, and then I'm not muting that last one. You know, and you just kind of play around and just play a couple notes at a time. Now, I've created a worksheet for this lesson that has everything we talked about, some tab that you can practice, and that's available for members of my website. There's a link down below for that. If you're on my Patreon, I'm still going to put it there, but I encourage you to check out my All Access Pass because it'll give you all the Patreon stuff like this worksheet and the full play-alongs for all the popular songs, but it also gives you access to my courses and my community, which are huge. So I do recommend checking that out. Don't forget to grab your copy of my free ebook. And if you enjoy learning guitar with me, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Have a fun time practicing, and I'll see you soon.